Yo, what's up nerds? It's MTG Man, and welcome to Deck to the Future, where I'm going to be making a commander deck for a card that isn't even out yet. Today is Daretti Rocketeer Engineer. This is part of the new Aether Drift set that's coming out in, I think, a month or so. It's going to be set in Kaladesh. They're not calling it Kaladesh anymore. I forget what the new name is, but same plane. The whole set's themed to racing, I believe, which is strange, but whatever. Let's just get into it. So, Daretti Rocketeer Engineer is an X5 Goblin Artificer, where X is equal to the greatest mana value among artifacts you control. And then, whenever it attacks or enters, you choose an artifact in your graveyard, you can sacrifice an artifact, and if you do, you return the chosen artifact to the battlefield. So this is going to be an artifact reanimator deck where we're going to be milling, discarding, and searching for artifacts that we can put in the graveyard, and then bring back with Daretti. We're going to try and take extra combats and flicker Daretti, and you can create copies of him. Red is definitely better at creating copies than flickering. Sure, you'll probably have to sacrifice the copies to the legend rule, but being able to get another ETB is really powerful, and the deck just tries to build up a big enough board state to run over the opponent. So let's just get into it. Starting off with Flicker, these are going to be copies we're creating. Most copies will have to sacrifice themselves to the legend rule. Delina doesn't have that ability, but they have to be exiled at the end of combat anyway. Electroduplicate, Heat Shimmer, Molten Duplication, Twin Flame. Blade of Selves is a little bit different, so it'll create, whenever Daretti attacks a player, it'll create a copy attacking each other player he can attack. So in a 4-player game, we'll get 2 Daretti ETBs from the attacking copies, and I think they also still get their attacks triggers because they come in attacking. So I believe that's 4 Daretti triggers when you attack with Daretti equipped with Blade of Selves, plus the one from the original Daretti, so 5. Plus Blade of Selves is an artifact, so it can either be sacrificed or it can be brought back with Daretti, which is very nice. Same with Helm of the Host, except those copies will stick around. You only get to create 1 every combat, but 1 Daretti ETB is still really powerful, and Helm of the Host is an artifact, so you'll be able to either bring it back or sacrifice it if need be. Mirror Pool is also just another way to copy Daretti. It's in the land slot. I thought it wouldn't really hurt to just have 1 more option. Getting into the big stuff. So the big stuff is what you want to be bringing back with Daretti. Combustible Gearhulk, when it enters, target opponent can have you draw 3 cards, and if they don't, you mill 3, and it deals damage to that player equal to the total mana value of the cards you milled. This can do 5, 10, 15 damage depending on what you mill over, and the deck wants to be milling anyway, so it really doesn't hurt whether you get to draw or whether you get to mill. The other cool thing is it has an ETB ability. Well, there are other artifacts with good ETBs, like Duplicant will exile a creature when it ETBs. So if you, let's just say you have Duplicant out, right? You play Duplicant, it exiles a creature. You get a Daretti trigger. You sacrifice Duplicant, you bring back Gearhulk. Then, the next time you get a Daretti trigger, you can sacrifice Gearhulk, bring back Duplicant. You can just kind of loop things back and forth to get really powerful ETBs over and over, which I think is some of like the bread and butter of the deck. Caged Sun, another powerful artifact. It's going to make all of your red sources tap for an extra red, which is really nice. And the deck only has so many red creatures, but giving them +1/+1 doesn't hurt. Cityscape Leveler, when it attacks or when you cast it, which you're probably not casting it, you destroy up to 1 target non-land permanent, and its controller creates a tap Power Stone. Power Stones aren't going to help your opponent too much, and this is just really powerful removal on a pretty solid body too. So it's going to be one of the best things Daretti can bring back. Cybermen Squadron is going to give all of your non-legendary artifact creatures Myriad, so when they attack for each other opponent other than the player that they're attacking, you create a copy that's attacking that opponent. So like Cityscape Leveler, you'll get to create 2 copies, you'll destroy 3 things total, including the original trigger, and then each player will have an 8/8 coming at them, so it's just very powerful. This Darksteel Forge, giving all your artifacts indestructible, yes, it's a very basic card, but indestructible, still very powerful. Dodging board wipes, dodging targeted removal, you know, they're going to have to go to like Path to Exile to destroy your creatures, they're going to have to go to like Chaos Warp to destroy your other shit. It's just going to make your board harder to interact with. Darksteel Monolith, indestructible. Once each turn you can pay 0 rather than paying the mana cost for a colorless spell you cast from your hand, so getting a free artifact is just pretty strong. Duplicate, as I mentioned earlier, is just good removal on a creature, getting to exile a creature, and it'll become a copy of the last creature exiled, which is pretty solid. Mirror works. Whenever a non-token artifact enters, you can pay 2. If you do, you create a token that's a copy of that artifact. This is another thing where, let's say we're doing that thing where we're sacrificing Duplicate, bringing back Gearhulk, sacrificing Gearhulk, bringing back Duplicate every Daretti trigger, right? Well, we can pay 2 each time to double up those abilities by creating a copy each time. So we're just going to create a bigger and bigger board with Mirror Works, even if we're sacrificing, and the number of permanents usually wouldn't change, which is very powerful. Mirror Battlesphere, another really strong ETB, it's just something powerful to get back. Nexus of Becoming, at the beginning of combat on your turn, you draw a card. Then you can exile an artifact or creature card from your hand. If you do, you create a token that's a copy of the exiled card, except it's a 3/3 golem. I know usually you don't want to exile things because you want to bring them back with Daretti. However, there are things that we are basically just using for the ability, like Darksteel Forge. Darksteel Forge, sure, it being a 9 and making Daretti a 9/5 isn't bad, but it's mostly just here because it'll give all your things indestructible. And this is just a cheaper way to get that out. The Phyrexian Triniform, when it dies, you create 3/3/3 colorless Phyrexian Golem artifact creature tokens, and to a similar extent, Triplicate Titan will create 3/3/3s that are artifact creatures. So let's just go over it. You sacrifice Triniform, you create 3/3/3s. Next time you have a Daretti trigger, you could sacrifice one of those 3/3s to bring back Triniform. You can just kind of keep going with that if you have Daretti triggers, which is very powerful. Platinum Angel and Platinum Empyrean, very classic new player traps where this card looks really powerful. And it can be in certain circumstances. I think the fact that Daretti can keep bringing them back from the graveyard is actually going to make them a lot stronger, and it's going to be a lot more for your opponent to deal with. Portal to Phyrexia, ETB, make each opponent sacrifice 3 creature, is brutal. This is probably one of the best things you can bring back. Moving into board wipes, Blasphemous Act and Obliterate. I know what you're saying. Obliterate destroys all artifacts. Oh no! Well, gee, it would sure suck if we were able to bring back a Darksteel Forge somehow. And then we just blow up everybody's lands, creatures, and artifacts except for ours. I mean, sure, we will still lose our lands and non-artifact creatures, but at that point, we've probably won the game. So I thought Obliterate is probably a fun little option here. Moving into draw, a lot of the draw is either going to help us create treasure tokens that we can sacrifice to Daretti, or it's also going to be discarding us cards because we want to discard cards to get things in the graveyard. It's like Big Score, Cathartic Reunion, Demand Answers, Faithless Looting, Faithless Salvaging, Pirate's Pillage, Quicksmith Genius, Thrill of Possibility, and Unexpected Windfall. Just really good options to help you get things in the graveyard, but also drawing you cards or creating you treasure. It does a little bit of everything. Moving into... Oh, Milliken shouldn't be in draw. Why are you in draw? Milliken mills a card. That's why it's here. It's an artifact you can sacrifice, it's ramp, and it mills a card. It's nice just having another way to get things into the graveyard. Extra combats. We're really just playing Seize the Day for extra combats, because it's a total of 2 extra combats, and it's not super expensive, and it just fit the best in this deck. Flicker-wise, we have Conjurer's Closet and Voyager Staff. Flickering is really hard to do in mono red without it being super expensive. Plus, these are also artifacts that you can either bring back or sacrifice. It's just going to give you more options. Darksteel Citadel, Fomori Vault, Sequestered Stash, Treasure Vault, Ugin's Labyrinth, Underdark Rift, Urza's Cave, Great Furnace, Mountains. The land base is pretty simple. However, having things like Darksteel Citadel, Treasure Vault, and Great Furnace is nice because we can sacrifice them to Daretti if we really need to. Urza's Cave is going to let us get things like Inventor's Fair, which we'll see later, which will let us help us tutor an artifact. Underdark Rift is nice removal. Being able to remove something with a land isn't really a bad option. Ugin's Labyrinth is an ancient tomb, but you don't lose life, which is pretty good, and you're able to get the card that you imprint back if need be later on in the game. It's just a good way to bump up your mana base. Sequestered Stash is going to help us get artifacts in the graveyard by milling, plus we can get back a cheap artifact if we want, so never really a bad option. And then Fomori Vault discards cards, which we want. It gets cards in hand, which we want, and it's bumped up by the number of artifacts we control, which we're going to be controlling artifacts since that's the point of the deck. Just felt like an auto-include at this point. Mill-wise, we had Milliken, and then Palantir of Orthanc. At the beginning of your end step, put an influence counter on it, and scry 2. Then target opponent can have you draw a card. If that player doesn't, you mill X, where X is the number of influence counters on it, and that player loses X life, where X is the mana value of those cards. To be honest at this point, this card is most likely just going to be a scry 2, draw 1 every turn, which will still help because you want cards in hand to discard. But if they choose to have you mill, you can get either a bunch of cards in your graveyard, or you'll mill over like a 8-9 drop artifact, and they'll lose 8 life for just letting you mill cards, which is also nice for you. Moving into miscellaneous synergy cards, Treasure Nabber is going to let you take your opponent's artifacts whenever they're tapped for mana, so this will help you ramp out, which is nice, but also you can sacrifice your opponent's artifacts with Daretti, which is pretty cool. I've never once had the problem where the background music stopped looping. Anywho, Panharmonicon is going to let you double up Daretti triggers, which is pretty powerful. Plus, there are other cards with strong ETBs in the deck, so never a bad option, and you can either sacrifice it or bring it back, which is good. Scrap Trawler is going to help you get things back from the graveyard. If you're sacrificing some of your bigger artifacts, this will let you get smaller ones back that you can then sacrifice for bigger ones. Moving into ramp, we play Descent into Avernus because it's just really good. And creating treasures is good, and the amount of ramp this does is good, and it just speeds up everyone's game. I think Descent into Avernus is one of the most fun cards ever printed. Arcane Signet, just good ramp. Fellwar Stone, Gilded Lotus is something nice to bring back, and good ramp. Liquimetal Torque is going to make target non-land permanent an artifact until end of turn. So if you have something you want to sacrifice, but like it's not an artifact, you can just turn something else into an artifact to sacrifice it with Daretti. If I remember correctly, this does end when it leaves zones, technically. I think when it leaves zones, it stops being an artifact. So it's not like you could, I'm trying to think of a good example. It's not like you can make Goblin Engineer an artifact, then sacrifice it to Daretti, and then bring it back with Daretti later in the same turn. I think Liquimetal Torque ends when they change zones, but it's still a very good option to turn other things into artifacts. Mind Stone for ramp, Soul Ring, Fire Diamond, a pretty consistent ramp package. Moving into more Reanimator cards, we don't want to keep reanimating with Daretti, because what if he becomes too expensive, or what if he's witness protection, or we have some sort of reason to why he can't activate his ability. It's nice to have backup options. So we will play the original Daretti Scrap Savant, which could also act as an alternate commander if need be. It lets you discard cards and draw cards, which is good. It lets us sacrifice an artifact to bring back an artifact, which is good. And you're probably never getting to the ultimate, so I won't even talk about it. We also have Goblin Welder and Trash for Treasure. They let you sacrifice artifacts to bring back artifacts, which is just a very powerful way to play. Moving into removal, we have Abrade, Cathartic Pyre, which is also kind of a draw spell, Chaos Warp, Guff rewrites history. Removal wasn't the most important thing in this deck. You also do have things like Cityscape Leveler and Duplicate and all those things, so yeah. Red is not the strongest removal color, as I've noticed. It can hit things for damage, it can hit artifacts, that's about it. Moving into tutors, Gamble I consider probably one of the best cards in this deck, because it searches for whatever you need, and then you get to discard a card at random. Hopefully it'll be something you want to put in the graveyard. Goblin Engineer, if Daretti had a sidekick, Goblin Engineer is the sidekick. When it enters, you search your library for an artifact card, put it in the graveyard, then shuffle. This is exactly what the deck wants, alright? We play Goblin Matron just to search for Goblin Engineer, because it's really strong to be able to get your Darksteel Forge, or your Cityscape Leveler, or Portal to Phyrexia, whatever artifact you want in the graveyard, being able to put it right there with Goblin Engineer is extremely strong. We don't even really care about the second ability. Reckless Handling is an artifact tutor, which is just pretty solid overall. Sojourner's Companion is going to let you search for an artifact land, which is kind of just a good backup in case you're out of artifacts and you need something to sacrifice. Inventor's Fair, as I mentioned earlier, it's just a tutor for an artifact, which is really great for a land slot. Moving into value. Value is just stuff that you can sacrifice and not feel bad about. So you play Ichor Wellspring, you draw a card, you sacrifice it to Daretti, you get something back with Daretti, but you also get to draw a card. Nimble Right Schematic will create 1/1 artifacts that you can also sacrifice, and Prize Statue will create treasures that'll either ramp you or you can sacrifice, which just felt pretty strong. Just getting a little bit extra out of something you're sacrificing to Daretti. Scrap Mastery, last card in the deck. It just lets you exile all artifacts from your graveyard, sacrifice all artifacts you control, and then put all cards you just exiled onto the battlefield. So you can just get back all the artifacts in your graveyard. And this can kind of just win you the game, depending on the board state. I'm sure your opponents get to do it too, but their artifacts aren't going to be as good as yours. Here's a note. People are going to put Darksteel and Blightsteel Colossus in their decks. Don't do it. You can't reanimate them. There's this little line of text at the bottom that says, if Blightsteel Colossus would be put into a graveyard from anywhere, reveal it and shuffle it into its owner's library. People cheat all the time. And I mean constantly. I've had players go, mill, blah, 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 and then as they're milling, they mill over a Blightsteel. Maybe they don't even realize it, right? And then they go on later in the game, and they cast like a reanimate. And they're like, oh yeah, I reanimate Blightsteel. You can't reanimate Blightsteel. It cannot be in the graveyard. There's not a... Unless I'm tripping, there is no way to get Blightsteel and Darksteel in the graveyard. As far as I know, none at all, because it shuffles itself back into the deck. So don't play these cards. This is just a warning. That being said, this deck is definitely on the more expensive level. This is not a build your own precon. This is not a $100 deck tech. This is a $336 deck tech. Because here's the thing, artifacts are expensive. Sure, there's some expensive lands and stuff too, but like Conjurer's Closet is $12. Portal to Phyrexia is like $25. Platinum Empyrion's like $15. Darksteel Monolith is $15. Darksteel Forge is $35. Cityscape and Cybermen are like $10 a piece. This deck definitely plays with some more expensive cards. And while you could build at budget, I think that bringing back some of those artifacts is going to be the most fun play pattern. So I'd rather build a deck with a less confined budget. And while, sure, the deck would be better if we added Ancient Tomb and a bunch of fetch lands, I still wanted to keep it like below 350-ish. I know it's a random number, but I think it's better to work with some constraint rather than, here's my $1,000 Daretti deck. And yes, it plays Metalworker, because Metalworker's fucking busted. That being said, to play a test hand, I think we would keep this. Because we go Mountain, we Faithless Looting, so we're going to go Portal of Phyrexia and probably a second Mountain, actually. Sorry, I should have drawn two. So we play a Mountain, we play a Milliken, we pass, we play a Mountain, we go Fire Diamond, enters tapped, we add Milliken, so we just get to mill a card. We could play Daretti this turn. Yeah, we play Daretti this turn, who am I kidding? So we get to mill a card, we play Daretti, we sacrifice Fire Diamond, we search, we find Portal to Phyrexia, we move it to the battlefield, each opponent sacrifices 3 creatures, and at the beginning of every at the beginning of our turn, we get to bring back a creature from the graveyard. So we can either bring back our Quicksmith Genius next turn, or something the opponent put in the graveyard. And then at this point, we would just move to turn 5. We have Chaos Warp if we need to destroy something. We have no real way to discard anything else at this point, but I mean, you could just like play Blade of Selves. Next turn we equip it to Daretti and we'll get 5 Daretti triggers every... There we go. So we mill, equip Blade of Selves. I think at this point, so Daretti attacks. We sacrifice Portal Phyrexia to 1 trigger. And we would get back Fire Diamond. On the next trigger, I think we... Oh, no, because... Do they all pick their targets at the same time? They might pick their targets at the same time. I don't know. Some part of me thinks I could go Portal to Phyrexia, and then on the next one I sacrifice... Or I target Portal to Phyrexia, sacrifice Fire Diamond, bring it back, and then choose Fire Diamond, sacrifice Portal to Phyrexia, and then after that loop, they would have sacrificed like 9 creatures. Daretti would be swinging in for 9 damage, plus nothing from Blade of Selves, but yeah. That's basically how the deck works. I mean, there's no better way to show it off than a turn 4 Portal to Phyrexia, and then just taking over the game like that. To play a second, holy shit. I just busted a nut. Like, Soul Ring, Mind Stone, pass into Ichor Wellspring. Ichor Wellspring, draw a card. Sacrifice Mind Stone, draw a card. Okay, there is no discard. That might be a little bit of a problem. Then again, the thing you can do is just not play cards and then discard the hand size at very worst. I should have played... Last turn I would have played Daretti, sacrificed Ichor Wellspring to draw a card, bring back Mind Stone. It's just like, this deck can do so much so fast. Going from like a neutral position to a winning position. So turn 1 gamble. We search for, I guess, Darksteel Forge. Might as well move it to hand. Shuffle. And then I'm going to put all the cards in my hand on the battlefield. I'm just going to close my eyes and pick one of them. That feels like I had my eyes closed. I'm just... Okay. So now Darksteel Forge is in the graveyard. Move to turn 2. We play an Underdark Rift into a Fellwar Stone. Into turn 3, Urza's Cave. I think Faithless Salvaging to discard a card and then draw a card. Yeah. And then we would get to Faithless Salvaging again to discard a card and draw a card. We play a mountain, I guess. Run out Daretti on turn 4? Why not? Sacrifice Fellwar Stone, get back Cityscape Leveler to the battlefield. Now Daretti is an 8-5, Cityscape Leveler is an 8-8, so we have 16 power on the board. And then we'd move to next turn. Sacrifice, is it 3 or 4? It's 3. Sacrifice Urza's Cave to search for a land. Sorry. I would have kept Mountain in hand. I would have played 3. Sacrificed Urza's Cave. You go back on top. We search for a... Only have 1 artifact, so I wouldn't play Fomori. What's in hand? Yeah, no Fomori Vault. Probably Sequestered Stash, honestly. So we move that to the battlefield. Right. Oh. So I would play it, because it doesn't go to hand. Never mind. Yeah. So then at this point, on our next turn, we just kind of like... Oh, well, that would have been shuffled. And we would have drawn. We would Sequestered Stash, sacrifice it, mill 5. And I mean, we're attacking with Cityscape Leveler. At need be, we could have run out, like, a Treasure Nabber, so that we could destroy the Treasure Nabber with Cityscape Leveler to create a Power Stone to sacrifice to Daretti. Either way, we've kind of taken over the board with the Cityscape Leveler. It's a little bit nuts how fast this game can just get out of hand as soon as Daretti hits the battlefield. That being said, sure, you could include a Metalworker, you could include Ancient Tomb, Mishra's Workshop, you know, you could definitely make this deck a lot stronger if you have the cards to bling it out or whatever. But for a, like, I don't want to say it's on the cheaper side, but, like, I paid way more than $300 for a Commander deck. I was running Outlaws. I was running, like, a... How much was that deck? Because if we go into decks, and then we go into my decks, I was running a... Well, I guess it was $500, plus Dockside was, like, $70. I was running, like, a $600 Outlaws deck, and my $1,000 Lord Windgrace deck. Like, really, $300 is only scratching the surface when it comes to MTG deck prices. That being said, this has been MTG Man. Like, subscribe, all that bullshit. Let me know. Do you want to see more Aether Drift Commanders? And I'll be back in the next one. Peace, yo. And definitely do not follow the channel that is not me, called Def Not MTG Man, because that's not me, and that's not where I put all my non-magic related videos. Thanks.